Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I am Danette Cook Adamson, the Special Collections Librarian here at Cal Poly Pomona. And today we are going to be learning about our campus history. In the Special Collections room, which is located on the 4th floor of the library, we have the University Archives. And it has lots of historic photographs of our campus, lots of artifacts, and other documents that chronicle our campus history. And each year our history classes visit Special Collections, and we take that opportunity to also teach them about our campus history. Those of us that work in Special Collections happen to think it's the most fun place in the library to visit, and so we do invite you to come visit us sometime in the Special Collections room. Well,
May I have your attention please? The Cal Poly University Library presents our campus history. Come and learn some things you did not know about campus. Today, 12 o'clock to 1 p.m. in the Special Events Room, 4829 on the 4th floor. Thank you. Please.
Well, Cal Poly Pomona's history is really the tale of 3 different campuses and 3 key men. There they are up there, all braided together to create the Cal Poly Pomona that we think of today. 2 of the men were real-life rich philanthropists. They are Charles Voorhees, that's him over here in the left corner, and of course we're all familiar with W.K. Kellogg. Of course, yes, we all recognize W.K. Kellogg because of his great success with developing Kellogg's cornflakes. And then the 3rd man that you may not be that familiar with is right up here in the center, Julian McPhee. And he started everything off up at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. So we'll be talking more about him later. And 3 campuses that I'm going to be referencing. Of course, we know the Kellogg campus, but, and there's also the original, that's the mother campus at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And then there's one that you may not have ever heard of. It was called the Voorhees campus, and it was originally the site of a philanthropic organization called the Voorhees School for Boys. And so actually, our school's founding date of 1938 is based on when that facility was given to the state of California to function as the southern branch for Cal Poly at San Luis Obispo. Now, the reason that Cal Poly at San Luis Obispo wanted a southern branch was because during California's, most of the 20th century, probably starting in the 1920s, citrus was a main crop. And San Luis Obispo was a little too far north for them to be able to grow citrus successfully. And so they were looking for a location in Southern California where they could teach citrus crops. And so, since they couldn't do it in San Luis Obispo, they ended up learning about the availability of the Voorhees School for Boys campus, and they were able to then successfully be able to teach citrus at that location. Well, the earliest date that in our history of Cal Poly goes all the way back to 1901, when the very first state-supported school in California came into being, and that was up at San Luis Obispo. And from the very beginning, this polytechnic school had the concept of learn by doing. And not surprisingly, they promoted a very practical, hands-on curricula which at least initially it focused on agriculture and the sciences. And you can see here an example of their hands-on curricula. This is in the machine shop there, and dating back to the 1910s. Cal Poly at San Luis Obispo was really hard hit during the Depression, and in 1933 it was actually in quite a bit of danger of being disbanded due to lack of funds. There was also the threat that the campus might be converted into a prison. So as a last resort, the astute educational administrator by the name of Julian McPhee, we saw his picture earlier, he was sent down from the state legislature to become the president of Cal Poly. And to save the campus, he instituted some severe fiscal policies. Essentially, he had to change Cal Poly into a 2-year technical school in order for it to survive during the Depression. However, by 1940, they were able once again to offer the 4-year course of study, and in 1942, the first bachelor's degrees were awarded. In the meantime, back in Southern California, there is Mr. Kellogg in his test kitchen in Battle Creek, Michigan. Of course, Mr. Kellogg's name is one we all recognize from the Kellogg's cornflakes fame. William Keith Kellogg was the younger brother of the very flamboyant Dr. John Kellogg, who ran a highly successful health spa for the rich and famous in Michigan. WK worked under his older brother in the sanitarium. It was sometimes referred to as the SAN. And the tale is that W.K. Kellogg made many unsuccessful attempts at trying to create a quick, healthy breakfast food in that test kitchen of the sanitarium. He wanted to address the fact that the American diet was changing away from the traditional, heavier eggs, bacon, sausage type of fare to something that was quicker, lighter, healthier. Then, in a classic case of serendipity, a batch of cornmeal was accidentally allowed to sit out, and it was then later, a few days later, it was turned through some processing rollers, and voila, the very first cornflakes were born. Of course, they first needed to get rid of the mold problem on the flakes. But they were able, W.K. Kellogg was a very savvy promoter, and he was able to deal with the mold problem, and with his new invention of cornflakes, he was well on his way to becoming a millionaire. And here are some of the employees at the Kellogg, mostly ladies. There's just this one young man in the back row, but they were the ones that packed these boxes of the toasted cornflakes.
Changed breakfast for millions of children.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And here is an early vintage ad from the Kellogg's Toasted Cornflakes Company. Well, such a wide open spaces, very pastoral looking. Winters in Michigan, of course, are very long and hard and cold, so it was not a surprise that once Kellogg became a wealthy man, he would want a winter home in a more warmer, milder climate of Southern California. Since childhood, Kellogg had been interested in Arabian horses, a breed that at that time was considered rare and exotic. As a boy, he had owned a horse that was supposedly part Arabian. So he decided to own and breed Arabian horses on his new property. In 1926, after a long search for the perfect location, the choice finally came down to just 2 locations. One was up in Santa Barbara, and the other possibility was in Pomona. And legend has it that Kellogg stopped his car and he flipped a coin in the air and he says, heads it's Pomona, tails it's Santa Barbara. And heads it was, and so the choice of the ranch site was decided. The Pomona property was originally 377 acres and at the time cost a mere $250,000 to purchase. Kellogg immediately set to work to build his dream ranch, and being a millionaire, he was able to hire one of the notable architects of the day, a man by the name of Myron Hunt. Myron Hunt also designed the Rose Bowl, some of the buildings at Caltech, and the Pasadena Public Library, some of the buildings at the Claremont colleges also. And the years 1926 to 27 were filled with building activity here at the Kellogg Ranch. And Myron Hunt designed some of the buildings that you're familiar with on campus. And let me just see whether, okay, here was the original horse stables back in 1931. There's Mr. Kellogg with Jadan. Let me just, okay. I want to point out that this mechanism right here, I believe that was used to convey the hay to all the different horse stalls. That was like a conveyor system. Yes. Okay, here is Mr. Kellogg with one of his favorites, Stallion Jadan. Over the next few years, Mr. Kellogg continued to purchase and to breed more Arabian horses to add to the original 11 horses that were first brought onto the ranch. And the Kellogg Ranch soon became a very popular destination spot for visitors, many of whom would drive from Los Angeles out to what they regarded as the country to see these exotic, rare Arabian horses. And informal Sunday horse shows, as you saw back at that historic postcard, they were held in the courtyard of the stables and soon drew large crowds and quickly became a tradition. The ranch was also a popular in spot for many Hollywood celebrities who liked to come out and have their photographs taken with the horses. Some of the biggest names of their day, I think Tom Mix was a cowboy star. And here we have some starlets. There's a Loretta Young, 1927, Lois Wilson, 1926. Here, he was the sex symbol, heartthrob of his era, Rudolph Valentino. And he very tragically died right after his last film was Son of the Sheik. And I mean, women were fainting over him. He was just quite impressive to the ladies. And but he died of a burst appendix right after his film. And this was too early for antibiotics, and so, it was very tragic that he died right after the film Son of the Sheik. So many other stars have visited our campus over the years, including Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, Charles Bronson, Robert Culp, and Bill Cosby. And some of the movies that have been filmed at our campus include Stalag 17, Imposter, Gattaca, Tip on a Dead Jockey, The Sandpiper, and I Spy. Well, by 1932, W.K. Kellogg, who was 72 years old at that time, and he was suffering from failing eyesight. He was going blind. he decided to donate his ranch and its 87 horses to the University of California. And it was stipulated that the Arabian horses must be kept and bred, that the Sunday horse shows would continue. And the transfer ceremony, and this is a photograph of that transfer ceremony, was broadcast live on NBC radio with the popular humorist Will Rogers as the master of ceremonies, and several newspaper journalists also covered the event. And as you look out on that crowd, that's a pretty impressive crowd, and it's estimated that there were 22,000 people at that event. But it seemed as though the University of California never really knew how to properly care for the ranch. Just a few years later, when Kellogg visited the ranch, he was not happy with the upkeep. And it is quoted that he found that the weeds were up and the fences were down. So, through political channels, Mr. Kellogg was a very patriotic man. He was able to have the ranch transferred in 1943 to the United States Army, where it became a cavalry remount station for the duration of World War II. And I might make the note that it's interesting that they thought that World War II would be possibly won on horseback, but I don't think that happened. Anyway, it was a remount station for a while, and we have a couple of photographs of the remount station. There it is when it was the administrative headquarters for the Army.
The weeds are pulled.
Yes. And there are a couple of officers loading an Arabian horse into that carrier. Interestingly, some of the upkeep of the ranch and the renovations that you can still see today, such as there's a low stone retaining wall that lines the road that goes up to the Kellogg House, Pomona. That wall, that retaining wall, was actually built by Italian prisoners of war who were being housed at the Los Angeles County Fairgrounds. At the end of World War II, however, the ranch and its horses were in imminent danger of being auctioned off to the public. And although quite elderly by this time and now completely blind, Kellogg did have enough political, powerful connections in Washington to halt the sale of the ranch and the horses at the 11th hour. And instead, transfer papers signed in 1947 by President Truman himself turned the ranch into the Kellogg unit of the California State Polytechnic College, San Luis Obispo. Again, with the stipulation that the Arabian horses must be kept, that the breeding of the horses and the Sunday horse show tradition continued. And I might say that that breeding program has been phenomenally successful because today, over 70% of all Arabian horses in the United States, they're much grown now in both popularity and numbers, they can trace their lineage back to Kellogg bloodstock. So Mr. Kellogg's dream of promoting and multiplying the Arabian horse really did come to fruition. Now I need to backtrack a little bit in time and discuss a third thread in the story of the history of our campus. This third thread also deals with a rich philanthropist by the name of Charles Voorhees. Mr. Voorhees made his money in the early automobile industry and also had various oil company investments, and he wisely got most of his money out before the stock market crashed in 1929. In 1927, Mr. Voorhees purchased a beautiful site called the Oak Knoll Ranch, and this site still exists. It is in San Dimas. It's now owned by another organization, the Tzu Chi Foundation. So he built a boys' residential school, and this was a charitable institution. The school was designed for boys who were of, quote, good character, but in unfortunate circumstances, and these conditions were not hard to find during the Depression. The school encompassed several beautiful Spanish-style buildings, including cottages, and each cottage had a house mother. They really wanted to make it as home-like for these boys as possible. There was a beautiful chapel, classrooms, fruit orchards, workshops where the boys could have the experience of learning practical hands-on skills where they could then be able to get a job after they graduated. And here are some of the boys that were educated at the Voorhees School for Boys. And I might point out, this is Jerry Voorhees right here. And Jerry Voorhees was the one who functioned as the father figure to all of these boys who attended the Voorhees School for Boys. He served tirelessly as the headmaster until 1937, when he was elected to Congress. He also served, as I said, as a father figure to these boys who, in many cases, they had been abandoned by their real fathers. From its inception, the Voorhees School for Boys was really the effort of Jerry Voorhees. And the Voorhees School for Boys ran from 1927 until 1938, when he was elected to Congress. And during its existence, the Voorhees School for Boys housed and educated approximately 300 needy boys. The emphasis was always on learning practical hands-on skills, and it often included agriculture and horticulture. And any boy who could get admitted into college would have his tuition paid by Charles Voorhees. And I might point out that we had the opportunity to interview this person right here. His name is Ben O'Brien. When we met him, he was probably in his 80s. And we interviewed him and his brother Earl O'Brien, and they had been abandoned by their father. He had hopped a freight train to Mexico and just left the family behind, a family of 4 boys. And so Ben O'Brien went on to become a judge, and his brother Earl became a administrator in the San Francisco juvenile division. And so what they were exposed to at the Voorhees School for Boys under the direction of Jerry Voorhees really transformed their life and just opened up the realm of possibilities to them. And so they will always be grateful to what they experienced at the Voorhees School for Boys. And here is a photograph of the chapel that this still stands over on the Voorhees campus, now owned by the Tzu Chi Foundation. And you can see some of the beautiful Spanish-style structures that are on that campus. And this chapel had just a perfect view of Mount Baldy out its back window. And here is a young picture of Jerry Voorhees around 1935. And we do have on our Special Collections website, in the gallery section, you can find a lot of information about the Voorhees School for Boys and about Charles Voorhees and Jerry Voorhees, and a lot of background on this. Also, Jerry Voorhees' son, Jerry Livingston Voorhees, has written a couple of books about his father, the idealist in Congress and an idealist in the private sector, and those are available, and you can take a look at those if you have interest on our Special Collections website in the gallery section. We also have made available some digitized oral history recordings. You can see here some of our past campus presidents, and also the interview with the OBrien brothers is there on this. Again, it's in the gallery section of the Special Collections homepage, and it's called Voices from Our Past. And so if you have an interest in listening to any of these oral history interviews, you're welcome to do so. Well, by 1937, Jerry Voorhees had been elected to Congress, and so that drew his time and his efforts elsewhere. And also, the money to run the Voorhees School was getting tighter. So the Voorhees family started to look for another institution which would take and carry on the same principles and goals that they had had at the Voorhees School for Boys. Through a San Dimas neighbor of the Voorhees property, this gentleman over here, Julian McPhee, was alerted to the possibility of acquiring this as a Southern Branch campus. Again, he was wanting to offer his students the opportunity to learn how to grow citrus, since citrus was such a huge part of California's economy. And so he was looking for a site where they could grow citrus. And so there, Julian McPhee is talking with Charles Voorhees, and they're kind of working out a deal of how the campus there at the Voorhees School for Boys might be donated to and become the Southern Branch, or the Voorhees unit of Cal Poly at San Luis Obispo. And this is why the year 1938 is considered our founding date. In the fall of 1938, it was an all-male campus, all-male enrollment at that time. And so there were 110 students from San Luis Obispo, and their studies focused on agriculture and the subtropical horticulture, the citrus products. However, the students were required to take all of their senior year classes back up at San Luis Obispo, and this was not really popular with the students, and it was considered a hardship by many. And here you see a sign that reflects all the different locations for California State Polytechnic College. We've got your San Luis Obispo location, you've got the Voorhees campus in San Dimas, and then you've got the Kellogg campus in Pomona. And these are some of the buildings at the Voorhees School for Boys at the time. This was the library. And here's the inside of the library, very cozy. Fireplace. And of course, an all-male student population. Well, during World War II, this is 1943 to 1946, literally every able-bodied male was drafted. And so that waylay, the Voorhees unit actually had to shut down because everybody had been drafted. So they were off fighting the war, and when it reopened in 1946, at the war's end, 90% of the returning students, and they were then able to get their college education through the GI Bill, they were much older because they had had that time, serving in World War II, and so you can see that some of them are younger looking, but a lot of them you can tell they're older students and they're returning GIs. Well, you can see here, this is the picture of Elephant Hill. This is taken around 1950. By 1948, both the Kellogg unit and on the old Kellogg Ranch site and the Voorhees unit in San Dimas, they were both functioning as southern units of Cal Poly at San Luis Obispo. Students were housed on the Voorhees campus, and they also took classes on the Kellogg campus. Only one bus left in the morning to take the winding road through the hills to the Kellogg campus, and these were the days before freeways. So, they had just to take this meandering road through the hills, and if a student missed the bus in the morning, he missed all of his classes. Well, 1949 marked the very first year that our campus entered a rose float in the Rose Parade. And seated on this little horse here was the son of his name was Jolly Batchelor. He was the head of ornamental horticulture, and these were his children that were riding on the float. And this little guy's name is Chip, and this horse actually rocked back and forth. Yes, it was quite something to see that. And and he got so enthusiastic with the excitement of it that he would just grab flowers off of the float and he'd throw them back at the audience. And by the end of the parade, the horse was totally denuded of all flowers within his arm's reach. But he was excited and he had a good time riding on that float. In 1949, Cal Poly, as I said, started the tradition of entering the Rose Float in the Rose Parade, and every year since then, we've had a student-built float in the parade, and they keep winning awards. In 1948, a Cal Poly student who was a Pasadena resident made an informal boast to a member of the Rose Parade committee that he thought that his campus could build a float. And later, he received a surprise phone call just a few weeks before the parade from a committee member, and he was asked if what he said was true. And although he had no formal campus approval, there was no budget, there was no design, there was no committee, his answer was an immediate, sure, we can build a float. And so he and his classmates were able to raise $250. So a shoestring budget, and somehow worked to get a float built in time. Now, rumor has it that one night just before the parade, the front yards in his Pasadena neighborhood became mysteriously devoid of all flowers. But this float, Childhood Memories, featured a moving, rocking horse with a real little boy in the saddle, and it won an award of merit. And as I said, during the parade, the little boy got so enthused that he grabbed all the flowers and threw them back at the audience, at the crowd. And anyway. And we do invite you to, we've made a website about the Cal Poly Rose Float collection. It does include a photograph of all the floats. It includes film clips of them so that you can actually see how they move, how they were animated. And so if you're interested in that, we invite you to take a closer look. Well, this is the very first state-built building, Science Building number 3. And it literally housed everything. So it had all of the administrative offices, it had the library, it had the bookstore, it had the classrooms. The late 1950s and the early 1960s on the Kellogg campus was just continuous building activity was taking place here. And pictures of the campus at this time show parking lots that look amazingly close to the classes. And yet it is funny to read, and we have all of the, in the university archives, we have all of the poly posts that have ever been published. And it's funny to read the contemporary accounts. The students kept complaining about the lack of good parking. You know, and you just can't believe it because they were just parking, you know, right next to buildings. It was just amazing, but they were not satisfied. Well, 1957 was the very first year that students were no longer forced to take their senior year classes back up at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And the very first graduation took place here at Cal Poly Pomona, and it existed entirely of agriculture majors. And it was held there in the Kellogg Rose Garden. 1957 was also the first time that non-agriculture majors were offered. Engineering and biology and physical education. Those were some of the three earliest additions to the curricula. Well, 1961 is an absolute landmark year for Cal Poly Pomona because that was the year that women were first admitted. And that was when 329 brave women joined a male student population of approximately 2,500. And it is interesting, as I said, we have all of the poly posts, the entire archive of the poly posts going back to the beginning. It is interesting to see the concerns and the comments about the addition of women at this time. And there was a planning committee's investigation report, and we have that in the special collections room. In the beginning, women were not treated equally at all. They were literally kept under lock and key. There were onerous curfews and dorm key rules that the men did not at all have to contend with. And it's also interesting to read comments in the old Poly Post about by the male students, and not all of them were happy about the idea of women coming to their campus. They had worries over now they won't be able to concentrate on their studies. Now they might have to groom themselves a little bit better. Maybe they're going to have to watch their language. Anyway, it was a mixed reaction, and not everybody was happy about this change. And just to show you what the women had to contend with, they talk about being prescriptive. They were told when they had to wear high heels, when they could wear flats. When they were to wear a hat, yes, if they were to attend a tea, and Mrs. Kramer did have teas, then they were to wear a hat, and yes, they did have to wear gloves if they were to attend a tea. So it's very, very prescriptive. Of course, they were not permitted to wear curlers outside the residence hall. And now during finals week, it was relaxed a bit. They could wear Bermudas or capris. They were permitted on campus in the classrooms, but very, very prescriptive. And here we have another example. Again, women kept under lock and key. Daily, they had contend with daily sign-outs, weekend sign-outs. And then the men just had this one sentence here, you know, that the men's hall's always open, the residents of the halls, you know, there was just a total inequity with how men and women were being treated. Now here we have a co-ed who is following the dress code. There she is. And now we have a Coed, this is 1971, we have a Coed who is not following the dress code, and nobody seems to care at all. So. And this picture is in here just to show that the Kellogg unit was added to the sign over the stables, late 1950s. And finally, in 1972, we were granted our university status. Here we have a picture from a dance. This was in the 1967 Bronco Handbook, and I think he's probably doing the twist. And that, of course, that was very popular during the 60s. And I think she may be doing the jerk, which was another very important dance during the 60s. So anyway, yes. Here we have our students that were getting ready to build the CP on Colt Hill, and this is around 1958. Look at that. Look at how close that parking is. And they were still complaining. Again, parking everywhere.
Right by the administration building.
And here are some views of taken from the late 1970s. You can see here, Building 94, the office building, has not yet been built. Now, the library used to be a lot shorter. Yes, just 3 stories there, and now it was in the late 80s that the top 2 floors were added to the library building. Again, parking, very close. Now you can all be very, very grateful that you belong to the computer age now, because our poor students, they had to wait in endlessly long lines to try to get their classes. And this was before computers. And so it was a very tedious process. And this was the original bookstore, which was underneath the current campus center. And you can tell people are not particularly happy, it seems like, in their line. So, in conclusion, I just want to say that Cal Poly Pomona has grown, it's evolved greatly over the years, and encompasses the efforts and the contributions of so many different individuals, some of whom live both miles and years apart, yet woven together, it creates this unique and dynamic campus that you see around us today. And again, I want to thank my wonderful colleague, Kimberly Erickson, who created this PowerPoint presentation I used today. And I thank you for your attention today.